Check 1, 2. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Measure P Oversight Committee for April 14th, 2025 at, what is it? 6:04 p.m. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda is the roll call.
All right, roll call. Chair Salmeron,
Present.
Vice Chair Farrell.
Present.
Commissioner Tibet,
Present.
Commissioner Gaddes, not present. Commissioner Brasenio,
Present.
and Commissioner Jones.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move up the community forum from item 12 to item number 4. If there are any members of the public who wish to make a comment, please approach the podium.
We do have one member, Mr. Jose Carrizales.
Please be sure to turn on the microphone, the handheld microphone at the podium. Thank you.
Jose Carrizales, one of my first few speeches was when this committee was formed, was to really hone in, really impress upon the committee not to be a wish list for the city's Vallejo staff. The citizens of Vallejo depend on you to make great and good decisions that will benefit the best interests of the citizens of Vallejo, not to blindly accept staff's recommendation. And I know you don't blindly. You have great questions about the items. One of the other things, as you know, I'm an unsheltered advocate, and there is nothing staff has done for my unsheltered friends who are out there in this community suffering and dying. The only one was, I hate to repeat it because it was one of the worst suggestions ever created, but not surprised knowing the staff, who the staff is. $500,000 set aside for a nonprofit to operate the Extreme Weather Center. Extreme Weather Center was opened the first night. There was no heat in the winter. How does that happen? There's planning in that the warming center. Supposedly, adults are creating that warming center. The first night, no heat. And 1:30 a.m., 1:18 a.m., I sent an email to city council because I was freezing. And there was only one gentleman there that night. So staff has demonstrated through their pattern and practice of not really wanting to do a great amount for my unsheltered friends. And I would hope that this committee would start to recognize that and impress upon staff to start to do something. Set aside, I laid out a plan of what I thought would help based on my knowledge, based on my life experience, based on my lived expertise, based on the national conference the 2 of the last 8 months that I've attended, being a speaker and a presenter. Based on all of that, I provided some thoughts on it. And there is help out there. You could ask for help. It's obvious staff don't want to do that. They have their philosophy, ideology, and the culture that the unsheltered population is not valued. Unfortunately, the death of Mr. James Oakley is a prime example. So I would hope that, and I do trust this committee. so that you will make the best possible decisions in the best interest of the citizens of Vallejo. We depend on you. Can't really depend on staff anymore. Thank you.
Time.
Do we have any other public comments or anybody online?
No other public comments at this time.
Thank you. We will move on to the next agenda item, informational item 5A, fiscal year 23-24 audit report presentation by LSL Auditor.
Hey, everyone. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
I'll just introduce Brandon. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Rekha Nair, Finance Director. With me is Florita Cruz. She's our Assistant Finance Director. And online is Brandon Young. He is the partner for LSL, and LSL are our independent auditors. And he will be presenting the report of the audit for Measure P. Brandon?
Thanks, Rekha. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
There's a horrible echo. See if that's me. You guys hear echo? No.
You sound okay.
Okay, I'll just roll. Thank you guys for having me. My name is Brandon, partner with LSL. We have been external auditor about years now. Work with the city in varying capacities last 5 years. Go to next slide, please.
He's coming in and out.
Can you try again, please?
I'm not in control.
Same thing. Give us 1 second, please.
Brandon, how about now?
Testing. Oh, that's a lot better. Okay, the echo's gone. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you guys can go to the whoever's controlling the slide. There you go. So this is our audit team. This is a portion of the audit team. They're also our staff members who work on the audit as well. So there are multiple partners involved. Christian Towns is a partner with me here who has worked on the audit for 3 years now. And then Kaylee and Chloe are both supervisors who have familiarity with the city, and they work with the city in varying capacities the last 3 years also. So they do the city's external audit, the ACFR audit, as well as the Measure P compliance audit that we're discussing tonight. Next slide, please. So the scope specific to the Measure P audit is we are doing a compliance audit specific to Measure P funding in accordance with these two requirements: the ordinance number 1866 NC and then the council expenditure direction with that resolution number. So we are verifying that the dollar amount spent and the money coming into the fund is properly tracked, and the money going out is in accordance with this ordinance and the council direction. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the scope. So this occurs during November and December of 2020 of each year usually. It's part of our year-end audit. It does involve examination of internal controls on making sure there's oversight on this money and that it's going where it belongs. If there was any feedback, we would provide feedback to management, better ways to track it. So this funding is tracked internally as a sub-fund of the general fund. So it is in a separate fund that we are able to track. It doesn't roll up like that in the ACFR, but it is something that we look at separately internally and test it for compliance. So we're looking at the transactions for the money going in to make sure that it is allocated into that Measure P sub-fund, and then the money going out, that it's in accordance with the ordinance and that it's for proper purposes as one of those bullet points that are listed out in the ordinance and in the footnotes of the document. Next slide, please. So overall, the results from the transactions that we tested, the money is being used in accordance with that ordinance in all material respects. It is shown as a transfer, but what we do with that transfer out is look at the underlying amounts that is covering for the transfer to make sure that it is one of those areas that is listed in the ordinance. If there were ever any issues or whatnot, we would disclose it as a compliance finding that it didn't seem like it met one of those criteria that the money's supposed to be used for. We didn't have that this year and didn't have that in years past. But if it were to come up, it would be disclosed. We also had no issues with our internal controls over tracking of the money internally based on what we reviewed. So no findings to report for this year's audit. So that really overall is an overall summary of what we do in the report in front of you and how it's derived. So I think any of the questions we have about our process or about the audit overall this year, I'm happy to answer for you all.
Brandon,
Yes,
I have a question. So the ordinance, do you have that in front of you or available?
I do. Let me pull it up. Yeah.
So I'm looking at it now. So 3.30.160 independent annual audit. It doesn't explicitly say that this would be a compliance audit. So I was wondering who made the decision to make this a compliance audit. The language says the proceeds resulting from the transactions and use tax imposed by this chapter shall be deposited into the city's general fund and shall be subject to the same independent annual audit requirements as any other general fund revenue. So when I hear that, I don't necessarily think that every other general fund item is just getting a compliance audit. So can you guys give us some more information on how this type of audit was selected for the Measure P?
Yeah, sure. So from my recollection, the last couple of years, and I'll let city staff chime in after. So the dollar amount, the audit that's referring to is so it is part of the city's external financial audit. It's part of the general fund audit. So that is a financial statement audit looking that the dollar amounts are recorded properly, that any disclosures are accurate, they're recorded in the proper period, things of that nature. So
I'm sorry, can you slow down a little bit? Can you slow down just a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Which part do you need me to repeat?
Going back to sorry, you were explaining the compliance with like the financial statements. So I mean, kind of the beginning of the purpose of the compliance audit.
So the requirements for an independent audit, when we were looking at it, it is part of the required independent audit that the city has every year. That you have an act for audit. So the funding is part of the general fund that is audited every single year as a major fund for the city's financial statements. So that is one step. So the compliance audit is actually an added step to do additional test work specific to the Measure P funding, and in the standalone report. So it's included as part of the general fund independent audit every year, and then there's also the standalone report that's a compliance audit. So I can't speak to the direction. It probably was council a couple years ago that gave the direction to add this step. So I don't know if city staff has additional information as to how we ended up with this report, but that was the direction that we were given, I believe, 2 years ago.
Great, because I'd be interested in who created the scope of work, and also if staff can provide this committee with a copy of the audit plan that was used for the MPOC.
So we just want to clarify. So there are two. So for Measure P, so we have two audits in 23-24. The first one is the financial audit, which is what you cited in here, like an independent audit. So that one is already covered by our financial audit. So in addition to that, we're also doing the compliance audit. And the compliance audit is kind of an additional audit on top of the requirement from the ordinance. So on the ordinance is saying we have to do, propose and actual expenditures. So that is really the focus of the compliance audit. So independent audit, we did it for Measure P as part of general fund. And we also do the compliance audit as just Measure P. So that is kind of in addition. We are doing the financial audit based on this ordinance, the independent audit that you're kind of referring to. But in addition to that, we're also doing the compliance audit. So if that is not what, we're kind of doing that as an additional audit. So it's really upon the direction of the Measure P and the council if you would like to stop the compliance audit.
So I'm asking this because if I think about Measure P's fund, we have a smaller fund and less activity than the entire general fund, right? So when I think of materiality thresholds, something that may be material to this committee and this specific fund may not look like it's material in the larger general fund. So if we're talking about having an independent audit, then we'd want to know what is happening that is material to Measure P, right? Because sitting here, I care more about materiality thresholds and compliance with this fund and not so much about the overall general fund. You guys have your counsel for that, right? So I'm more concerned about that. So that's why I'm asking about the scope of work. And so hearing that this financial audit was done general fund, meaning that materiality is probably like way above whatever Measure P has in the bank. You know, I'm really understanding and appreciating the language of the ordinance that says that we can have an independent annual audit. And so I think that's something that will be important for everybody to consider going forward, is having an independent auditor for Measure P. The ordinance allows for that, and then that will give us a set of fresh eyes that is specific to this fund, and we're not layering on different audits or compliance testing on top of something you've done for the entire city, because we're really focused on just this fund.
So for that, we might need kind of, if that is really the direction, we need to have a direction separately, because for the city, the independent audit is covering all the funds. We don't have a separate audit trust for a specific fund. So if that is the direction, then we need that direction.
And I'd be happy to make a motion and put this on a separate agenda item, but I think understanding this part of this presentation so far, that's probably the direction that, you know, I would take this conversation next.
And you're not referring having a different auditor? Is
Absolutely,
That, oh,
yes.
okay, all right.
And who pays for this audit? Is Measure P paying for our audit services, or it's out of the?
Currently, it's all part of the single scope that we have or the single contract that we have with LSL that covers all our single audits, housing, and then Measure BV, Measure P, and then the citywide.
So this is a question for Brandon. Is there any, could you share any specific procedures that were used specifically for the Measure P compliance audit? I would like to understand kind of the nature and the timing of the testing that was done that was specific to Measure P.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so for this report, the money coming in, there is deposits usually throughout the year. It's collected. It's sales tax. So we are actually getting the remittances for each one of the deposits related to Measure P to make sure it's allocated in this fund correctly. And then the way that the expenditures are set up, since it's part of the general fund, there are supporting documentation for when the money is transferred over to the greater general fund to cover expenditures. And then those underlying costs are analyzed to ensure, therefore, streets and roads, neighborhood improvements, whether it's homelessness and making sure that it's in accordance with what's in that ordinance. So there's, and I should clarify, we are independent auditors, so there wouldn't be, in my mind, any value add to having another person look at it the way it's set up. And the way it's structured is it has to be rolled into the general fund. It's not considered a special revenue fund.
Thank you. So when we're testing controls of Measure P, compliance of controls of Measure P, we're just testing like when the sales tax revenue was received, how, you know, transactions that allocate it to this fund, and then any transfers, testing the amounts and the timing of that, and then the actual expenditures, comparing that against the priority that it was recommended to fund. So if we said it was for homelessness, then we see that it's going to homelessness. So at that point, are we verifying vendors? Are we doing third-party inquiries or asking vendors, you know, like, did you really receive $500,000 from the city of Vallejo for this kind of service? Like, how exactly are you testing that the money was spent according to the priority?
So we're pulling the invoices and the checks underlying these transactions. We are not reaching out to the vendors because the invoices and the checks supporting documentation that we received from the city.
Brandon, good evening. So I have no background whatsoever in audits, but let's assume that one of the contractors paid, I assume through Measure P funds, I can't produce a record to show it, is unlicensed and was required to have a state license to provide security services at the homeless shelter under construction with Measure P funds. How would that surface and be called out as a problem?
So in this audit, that would be outside the scope because what we'd be looking at is that it was spent for something intended to be for homelessness or a vendor that would be vetted by the city. That would not be part of the scope of this compliance audit.
Okay, so it did surface in what was referred to, I think, as a management audit. Were you provided a copy of that management audit of the Broadway project, which has received substantial Measure P funding?
I believe we have received it. I have to go back and double check.
Have you yourself read it?
I have not, no.
Okay, so again, I don't trust myself as someone with no accounting background, but I believe I was told by the city manager that there were internal controls missing with respect to payments made by the city as a result of invoices forwarded by Firm Foundation when there was no contract between the Firm Foundation and the city of Vallejo for the finance department to know when to process the invoices. And that's my understanding. How would that surface in your audit?
In this audit, that would not be within the scope of our audit.
So we desperately want to know a lot about both unlicensed contractors receiving payments with Measure P money and a lack of internal controls such as I described. And this is hypothetical at this point. We don't need to get into the weeds about either of those. But how do we protect the city's Measure P funds against those sorts of problems?
Yeah, understood. I think you're referring to probably more of a performance type audit that is, or kind of an agreed upon procedures that is geared towards specific procedures and measures that are directed probably by this group about what you want reviewed and recommendations and feedback specific to those. That is a different type of audit that you would be referring to.
Okay, we want a functional, highly enlightening, useful tool every year, not just when we have suspicions that there's a problem. How do we get that?
So if you have specific things that have been found that can be researched, you can set up an audit to research those specific concerns that would give feedback. You can direct how many transactions are looked at and what the procedure is. That would be probably an AEP report.
Okay, but we don't know when to press for those details. We wanted, of course, to have something in place that would have highlighted the seriousness of the failure to have a contract between the city and the developer for the Broadway project. So we were processing invoices without adequate guidance and a framework for the finance department. This is all hypothetical. I'm not trying to prove these things.
That's right. Yeah.
My understanding, but we need a system in place that prevents those problems from arising and then results in early detection. We can't rely on our taking initiative or specifically requesting things when we don't know of a problem.
So I have a question. And I actually don't think it's towards LSL. It's towards city staff. So they're only going to do what you tell them to do. And they're not going to go outside of the scope because then it would be scope creep, right? And then we end up in a bad position. So what we need to see, I guess, is how the scope of work is written. So that way we can understand what is included within the audit itself and see if we need to enhance the scope of work to include things and put in some kind of triggers to understand if the funds are being allocated to the right people.
And part of my concern about having the same auditor who is looking at the city's funds and Measure P's funds, I can give you an actual example. the city approved an invoice from a vendor used on a homelessness project on January 9th, 2024. The invoice is dated May 25th, 2023. And then it was paid on January 17th, 2024. And that invoice, basically, that expense didn't make it into the general ledger in the correct fiscal year. It went in the next fiscal year. Unfortunately, that invoice was $1,417,000. So for me, that seems like a material amount that didn't make it, an expense that didn't make it into the correct fiscal year, right? So if we're saying that we have an auditor who's looking at all of the city's funds and Measure P's funds, I'm only looking at Measure P's funds. And that's how I was able to find this invoice, is because I have tunnel vision on Measure P. That's all I'm looking at here. I'm not looking at anything else. So if I can find that as a volunteer, just by looking at Measure P and looking at the history of our projects in public records, then I would like to have that kind of faith in an auditor. And that's why I think it's important to differentiate who's auditing the city's finances and then who's really having a scope that is specific to Measure P. Because I know that if you spend enough time looking at things that are related to Measure P, you might find what you're looking for. So that's an example. And Reka, I can give you this invoice number so you can look into it later. Also, another question I have is in terms of the loans that Measure P is issuing, what are the compliance testing and what does it look like from LSL's standpoint when Measure P issues a loan? And what type of testing and procedures do you do to follow up, and how do you determine that everything is in compliance?
So with the fiscal year 24 report in front of you, it included the money coming in and the money going out, and the loans were not a part of it.
For 23-24, the loan is not, like, this is a 23-24 audit. The loan did not happen in 23-24. In 24, it would be in 24-25. So they have not looked at the transaction because it did not happen in 23.
Okay, great. So then we'll need to make sure as a committee, we remember to add that to the scope of work. So that way our auditors can take a look at our loans receivables, assets, and their potential impairments.
Yes, so Chair, on that, like the scope of work will really depend on what audit you would like. So if it's a compliance audit, if it's a performance audit, if it's a financial audit. So we need that direction because the scope will be focused on whatever type of audit you need. If you need performance audit, it would be a different scope. If it's a financial audit, it would be a different scope. So it really depends on what would be the audit that you would like to see.
So I have a question for let's say that one invoice. It was issued in May, paid in January. The fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th, right? So it made it into the next fiscal year. Was there an accounting adjustment that was completed in order?
To see that.
Yeah. So, which brings me to my overall questions about compliance. So you only did a compliance for Measure P, correct? Not for the general funds?
Measure B and Measure V.
Okay. So the measures, but not general funds.
Mm-hmm.
So that would fall under the general funds of how you're paying the invoices and how things would be allocated, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So are you looking at the compliance on how they're utilizing GAAP rules and how they are? So you're doing sampling?
So
I would love to
it
see
be
what the
also-
methodology you're using for the
It would
sampling.
also be a direction if you want full audit, like meaning,
No, I got, yeah.
meaning full or sampling, because it really depends on what you would like to see. Like if the scope is full audit,
Mhm.
yes. If it's like, because like
Right.
right now, like they normally do testing or something.
Right.
Yeah, but maybe Brandon can explain.
You guys are cutting out a little bit. I can't hear what Reka and Floyd are saying a lot.
Brandon, the question is,
There we go.
what is the methodology that LSL has used for testing and deciding on the sampling when doing the general fund audit or the city's audit?
Yeah, so the materiality changes every year based on the intended usage of the funds for that specific fund, and it's usually a percentage of either assets or revenue, dependent on fund purpose. That materiality and kind of tolerable misstatement goes into sampling documentation that is intended to be representative of the overall fund overall, and then essentially tells you how many you need to test in order to get kind of an unmodified opinion in material respects for those funds. And that includes checks dispersed, money coming in, journal entries you select, capital asset selection. So that's what dictates. And there's different materiality and methodology for each major fund and then the aggregate non-major funds overall for the city.
Right, and I understand, and the point is taken of which type of audit, right? Because it obviously takes a lot more resources to do a full audit versus just a sampling. And
well, I guess I should, a full audit always will include sampling. If you're like talking about every single transaction, that would be different for the city.
what's your definition of a full audit? Because that's,
Well, I mean, I think that the financial statement audit that the city has is absolutely a full audit, and there are thousands of hours included in that.
right, so that's what I'm saying. So if you do it a full audit, it would be a lot more staffing power. So that way, the cost of the audit would go up versus the sampling.
And it will entail more time as well, like the period of the audit as well.
As a layperson who defers to the professional experts in the room, a question I have is, might we form a subcommittee going forward, since we have member experts, to work with staff and our consultant to develop a proposal for doing this? Well, to consider options. I don't know what we might decide. And the audit that was done by MRG, while devastating in many ways, it's incomplete in many fundamental ways, but there wasn't a public discussion about what the scope of work would be, and now we have it, and more work could be done. And I realize we can't spend forever looking at every piece of paper, but I would certainly like to hear recommendations from staff, our consultant, and a couple of members of our own committee about how to do this going forward, so we get a more complete report, since we do know about some problems that arose that were not picked up by these audits. Does that make sense? As something to look at, and then it'll be up to the council whether to proceed with something. So I'm not advocating for anything, just that we have options that we didn't know to ask about, and you didn't know we might have questions until we got to this point.
Chair, may I make a suggestion for the commission? If I remember right, and I apologize for not having the ordinance with me this evening, but I believe the ordinance requires you to do an annual report once you review the audit. And I think what Vice Chair Farrell is asking for could be included as part of that report.
That's a good point.
And I think that you could certainly create a subcommittee to work on a draft of the report and to have meetings with whoever you feel the need to have a meeting with.
Thank you, and that is subsection 2 that you're referring to nearly verbatim. Thank you.
Okay, final question for me. How does LSL perform a risk assessment for the Measure P Oversight Committee and the Measure P Fund specifically?
So the risk assessment is for the financial statement audit overall, and then the risk assessment for the compliance audit would be based on the number of transactions that are coming in and going out. The way it's set up, really, the transactions overall are, most all of them are looked at because they're coming in bulk. So the assessment is kind of the ongoing environment, and then really is making sure that the money going out is what it's intended for.
Thank you. So for staff and the committee, I think that's another important factor to consider, because we know that the funds that have been budgeted and allocated have, as of the 12/31 data we haven't had a lot of actual expenditures. So that means that the transaction volume was lower, right, for this time around. So if we know that things like that could impact risk assessment, then we need to keep that in mind that, we're not spending this money. So, there are lots of items that are potentially unchecked. If we're just holding this money in other accounts, no one's going to look at it because it doesn't seem material because it's not being spent.
So it's not just expenditures though. There are also like the materiality also looks at the total assets. So it's like assets, revenues, and expenditures. So even if you're not spending, materiality will also consider the asset part of it, which is the unspent cash. So
Right,
that's
but
why-
if we're looking at the number of transactions and we just don't have a lot of transactions because the money's not being spent,
No, what I'm
then-
saying is for materiality, if it's not spent, then the cash, it's not the transaction, it's the total cash. So if you're not spending it, then they will look at it as well on the total assets side of it. So the materiality will not only consider expenditures, they will also look at if you're not spending it, then they're also doing like, okay, then the cash is here. Like you also have the threshold. So it's a combination. And Brandon can clarify on that as well. For the materiality threshold, you're not just looking at expenditures, right? You're also looking at the cash, the assets side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the report has there's a balance sheet too to show kind of the cash balance at June 30th of unspent proceeds that is factored into the risk assessment and materiality. Yes.
Brandon, I probably talked and didn't stop and listen. You don't know have you yourself read the MRG report about the Broadway project?
I have not yet read the MRG report. No,
And do you know whether anyone in your office has?
I cannot confirm. I'd have to ask.
Okay, would that be something you'd want to see? Like, although it may have been described to us as a management audit, it may be a bit of a hybrid.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be happy to read it.
Oh, okay, but was it provided to you?
I have to go back and check.
Okay, do you read everything that staff provides as relevant background or someone on your staff?
Yeah, if staff sends it to us, absolutely, somebody will read through it.
And so that's what I would assume. But since you don't know if anyone read it, I'm not sure you received it. You don't know, correct?
I cannot confirm. No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, we will thank Brandon for his time and move on to the next agenda item. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So I needed to ask, Randy, is it at this time that we ask for like what the scope would be in the next audit, or how does that
So-
come back to us?
So this is on the agenda as an informational item, so unfortunately, the commission can't take any action on it this evening. What I would suggest is to bring it back under the action calendar so that you can appoint your subcommittee if that's what you want to do, and move forward with getting the report started, and you can make all the recommendations that you need to make in that report, which goes to the council and is a public document as well.
Thank you. That seems very practical. And I'm inferring that we won't need to go through a two-step process to get it on an agenda since it's already called out in
No,
the ordinance.
It's called out in the
Yeah,
ordinance.
Thank you.
It's something that's mandatory for you to do, so we'll just put it back on.
Thank you for that. All right, so now we'll move on to the next item. It is number 6, consent calendar and approval of the agenda. So let's see. So we only have an item for approving the minutes, not approving the agenda, Randy. Okay, great. So if everybody could take a moment to take a look at the agenda, and then I will take a ask for someone to make a motion to approve the agenda.
My motion to approve or consent?
I second.
Great. We have a motion by Briseno, a second by Farrell. Commissioner Tibet? Yes. Yes. Chair Sadmiron?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I can't. Jones, my apologies.
Yes.
Thank you. So we have pass. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, Brian, Farrell was the first,
Yeah.
sorry, and Resend. Thank you, sorry.
Great. And now I'll ask everyone to take a look at the minutes for January 23rd, 2005 and March 13th, or 2025 and March 13, 2025, and for someone to make a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
It's a cancellation notice that we were advised.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, who second? I couldn't hear. Thank you. Chair Sanmeron,
Yes.
Vice Chair Farrell,
Yes.
Briseno, Commissioner.
Yes.
Thank you. And Jones
Yes.
and Tibet.
Yes.
Thank you. Passes.
Chair Summerone, just as a matter of clarification for the commission and hopefully to help you make your process a little more efficient, anything that's on the consent calendar, including the approval of the agenda, you can do all of that with just one motion in the future. That way, hopefully it'll make things a little bit easier for you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, our next item is 7, report to the committee of the committee board secretary.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Item 8, report of the city council liaison.
Councilmember Matias, be sure to turn on that microphone.
Good evening, commissioners, chairman, vice chairman. Always a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for your very thorough work just now. That was the intent behind former Councilmember Loeta Diaz's efforts to have language added to the ordinance that would create this oversight commission. And so I want to thank you, and I very much look forward to reviewing your report and having it be made available to the public so that we can continue to make improvements to the process in the months and years ahead. As part of my report out, what I usually do is report back to each of the commissions on council business in the preceding month. And in this past month, we went ahead and approved the mid-year budget, and one of the adjustments, there were several adjustments made by council, part of which include the following. We augmented the business hardening grant, increasing the amount available to businesses in that program for 125,000. We set aside funding for a development fee study, and also set aside some funding for a gun violence prevention consultant that's going to take a look at 3 key areas to help us assess what efforts we can take there. As a council, we had 2 workshops on the budget for fiscal year 25-26, and we provided direction to staff at each of those. Those took place on March 12th and just this past Saturday. And then in terms of action items, there were sort of 3 items that I wanted to bring to your attention. Number 1, the Causeway Bridge, which you guys voted on and made a recommendation, which included $3 million in Measure P dollars. And there was a documents production provision that was attached to that resolution that the council voted on. And I think staff is making its way through producing most of the documents. I guess the city attorney can comment on that point. But we did go ahead and approve the repairs for the maintenance bridge. We also went ahead and approved the repavement expenditure for $10 million for this summer. Those maps are available on the website, so you can see which streets in each of the districts is going to be impacted. And then in addition to that, we also had a special meeting on the city's efforts to support our unhoused neighbors, and we provided direction to city staff at that meeting. I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we can have a follow-up conversation as a council to continue to move that work forward. It's my personal opinion that we haven't moved fast enough on that front. And then for this commission's awareness, there were 2 items that were made as referrals, meaning they'll be coming back to this body for your consideration. One of them was mine. The other one was Mayor Source's. The first is connected to the Causeway Bridge request. So I made a referral to the Measure P body to consider making 1% of the total budget cost to repair that bridge to be considered for a public arts program. So that will be coming to you in a future agenda item. And then Mayor Source made a second referral for a $5.6 million allocation to pay for half of the expense associated with having the sheriff provide additional policing support in 2026. So those items will be both coming back to you for consideration and for your own deliberation on it at a future meeting. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on any of those items. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is it possible to have those referrals at our next meeting? We have a slew of other funding requests, and I think it would be efficient for us to receive all current funding requests and or referrals at the same time.
We'll look at our city attorney on that one.
I've just written those down. I'm going to make sure that they're on your agenda. They're council direction. So I'll make sure that they get on the agenda for you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I recall reading a letter that Chair Salmarone wrote to select senior city staff, and I think you were copied also, regarding Causeway-related records and Mare Island fees. And I'm following up to get a deadline for the staff response to that. But it did not happen at or before the meeting, and I'm not objecting because it came in pretty close in time to the meeting, but I would like to do a check-in that those records will be provided to the community. And you can't do it. So I think it's more to the city attorney and yeah.
So during the time most of that was going on, I was on vacation, unfortunately. So I'm kind of catching up too. My understanding is that A good portion of the documents have been provided. There are some requests that are fairly voluminous that are on what we call a rolling production. So as we locate records and process them through the system of making sure there is no privileged information or redactions needed, those then get released in the portal, the next request portal, which is how we handle Public Records Act requests. Since I returned from vacation, there were a couple of other requests that were discovered that came in as separate emails to different staff people. And sometimes it takes a while for those to catch up for the people who are processing the Public Records Act requests. We have those now, and they're working on those. And some of those requests are also mixed in with requests for information versus requests for documents, which are kind of two different things that we have to kind of process differently. So those are being worked on. So to answer your question, Mr. Farrell, it's not done, but a good portion of it is, and they are working on it.
I am not as well informed as Chair Sal Marone or some folks who live at Mare Island, but I know it is their belief that they have exerted enormous effort over several years to collect relevant records, and they don't feel that there's been collaboration. That's why I was asking for a deadline for production, and you've explained why that's hard to provide, but I guess I would like this added to our next agenda for an update.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
And for clarity, sorry about that. The email that Co-Chair Farrell is referring to is my response to the city's response of our 6 questions, and the city cited a specific legal document and their interpretation of that legal document. And so as I was reading the response given by the city, I asked if the citation in that legal document could be provided to the residents and to council to help them with the decision making, just to understand the city's interpretation of that legal document that was cited in the city's response to Measure P's questions.
Thank you for that. And the point I will add is you guys have been paying attention to our first 90-something days in office. We've been doing everything we can to increase transparency to the community. And so we went ahead and authorized all the requests that this body made, all of them. So I hope that that's helpful to answer any questions that may be coming from the public and to hopefully bring some resolution to some of these matters in the near future. Any other questions?
Will you stick around for our work plan?
Of course.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, next item, number 9, report of the chairperson and members of the committee. We haven't had a meeting in quite some time. One of the updates that I wanted to share was that earlier this year, I attended an event that was hosted by BWAPA, led by Jalen Graves. And it was about cyberbullying and being aware of our internet presence and how, you know, we impact others. And it was just a really great event that, you know, really spoke to a lot of members of the community. There were students there, there were parents, and there were just members of the community who decided to stop by for some presentations. Presentations were given by licensed psychologists, Solano Board of Education, and then also iHeart, along with Sergeant Hollis. And so I wanted to share that because I think BWAPA did an amazing job, but also I learned at that meeting that iHeart is actually going to celebrate their 1-year anniversary. I think it's this week. And so they shared some really good stats with us and how they've been able to make an impact in the community, you know, down to how many calls they were able to, you know, accept, how many of those calls actually required officer intervention, which was very few relative to the number of calls that they've received so far. So, you know, I would like to invite iHeart to make a presentation to Measure P and to staff. I know that at council meetings recently, that has been a topic of discussion, including iHeart. But I think that getting ahead of some of these issues and really engaging our community experts is important. And even if it's just an information item and us understanding it's a learning moment for this committee, but also staff, who's out there, what they're doing, what they're currently working on, and what are some of their obstacles to assisting our community. So whether that is they're having obstacles with funding or they need access to a point of contact in the city, I think it's just good for us to know that. So I'm happy to make that suggestion for future agenda items, but I wanted to give a little bit of, just a little bit of clarity and color on how I came to have that idea. And it was because I went to a really great event where a lot of people took away some really good information about mental health and their presence on the internet. And that's all I have to report. Anybody else?
So as all cities face more and more severe budget realities, Measure P predictably is coming up more often at council meetings as a possible source of funding for a variety of different city expenses. And it's obvious, and it should be no surprise that there are some sharp disagreements about what will fulfill the promised purposes of Measure P and what will not. And I would note, as a member of this committee, I've discovered there were all kinds of things that were never considered during the campaign or in submitting ballot arguments. I signed one, as did Council Member Matias, but I do have some specific knowledge about certain items that were intentionally not included in the list of potential expenditures for Measure P, and that was expressed during the campaign. Does that mean that could never be revisited? Legally, it can be revisited. However, a betrayal of trust resulted in the city's sales tax measure losing in 2020 because Measure B sales tax revenue, based on the expectations of many, was not used as was promised, and that was a campaign liability in the 2020 sales tax campaign. So in 2022, in order to be successful and to help the city address long-term unmet major ongoing expenses, folks worked hard to get Measure P passed, and it does come with certain expectations, some of which are expressed in ballot arguments. And in my knowledge, and others can have different information, salaries were not to be a part of Measure P expenditures. Perhaps a one-year public safety intervention such as proposed, that's different than funding staff positions in perpetuity, which are then subject to regional labor market studies. CalPERS today is very alarmed about things happening in Washington and on the stock market. They may not be able to meet their annual projected increase in revenue, and which would result in them burdening cities in California with much higher contributions to the PERS pension plan. So locking in salaries is different. This is my experience, my opinion about the history, and I have reread the ballot arguments. I'm bringing this up because when we receive large specific requests for Measure P recommendations that have not been vetted by the council at all before they come to Measure P, even though that's not required by the ordinance, staff can recommend how Measure P funding is used. Of course, the ordinance doesn't prohibit engaging the council and community in a conversation about priorities each year. And we had a spike in very serious crime in the last month, and we have in the last few years. But what happened at the Super 8 motel and the motorists getting robbed while in their cars at intersections on Admiral Callahan, things can change, and we should still do long-range planning, but I strongly recommend that each year council provides some general direction. Do they want 70% to go to street replacement and repair, or 45%? And what would they like to see regarding the other statutory priorities? And I would like council to reconsider including retaining and attracting businesses in Vallejo, which was identified in the ballot argument as a purpose for Measure P, but it's not included in our ordinance. All that is said by way of what's going on at the moment. And so I think it's cause to revisit how we do this strategically and not simply on a project by project basis or a cost overrun basis or unfilled or unmet department requests for funding out of the general fund budget. I think we should get some general guidance each year from council before we have specific project proposals, because it's hard work studying those, and for staff, they do superb presentations, and there's lots of work required to assemble all the necessary documents. And so I'm would like our work plan to address this also, but I wanted to bring it up as a timely subject because Measure P is being looked at very closely right now as a way to get through this tough period. But we made a commitment to contribute major funding to unmet major issues that have existed here for, in some cases, decades. I don't have the answers. I just want to be guided by the council and community. Thank you.
Thank you. We can move on to our next item, number 10 on the action calendar. So that's 10A, nominate and elect chairperson and vice chairperson. So this is by motion. Anybody can make a motion. We should, Randy, should we make two separate motions, one for chair and one for vice chair?
So usually what would happen is you would make nominations first, and you could go down the line to each committee member and ask if they have a nomination. If somebody does, once you have a group of nominees or a nominee, someone could make a motion to elect that person to the position.
Perfect. So we'll do one position at a time.
That's the easy way.
But I would like to nominate Jasmine Salmarone to serve another term as the chair of the Measure P Oversight Committee.
I second that.
Yes from Jones.
This was a nomination.
Well, that was the nomination. Let's do the election now.
I accept.
Okay.
I just wanted you to have time to comment.
So Vice Chair, would you give us a motion to appoint her as the chair?
I would move for the election and reappointment of Jasmine Salmarone as chair of the Measure P Oversight Committee.
I second.
Yes from Jones.
Yes from Salmeron.
Yes from Farrell.
Yes from Brisenia.
Before we move to the next item, I can't presume to speak for anyone, but I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that Chairman Salmarone has done promoting maximum participation, transparency, and preparation for our meetings, and welcoming all community members and full participation by everyone. And if this isn't a model board or commission, and I've been connected with many over decades, I don't know what is. We're really lucky in Vallejo to have such an important committee led by Chair Salmarone.
Thank you, Jasmine.
So who wants to be the co-chair?
Any nominations for co-chair?
I would like to nominate Tibet.
I second the nomination.
Want to turn that into a motion to elect him?
I'd like to make a motion that we nominate and elect Kanat Tibet as our MPOC vice chairman.
Jones? Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
In Tibet, Salmeron,
Yes.
Yes.
and Brisenia.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was the fastest item in the history of Measure P. All right. So next, 10B, committee work plan, timelines, and deliverables. And it's not going to be that quick. All right. And can we make the PowerPoint larger in front of us? Thank you. So on the first slide, I have a quote from the ordinance. The Citizens Oversight Committee shall annually review and report on A, the city's proposed and actual expenditure of proceeds generated by the transactions in use tax. So the chart that I have, or the table that I have on this slide, is something that I created based on all of the financial information that it was available to me at the time. So I went through and I listed out every single project and its priority, contact person that was presented to the Measure P Oversight Committee. And it's broken out by the date that it was presented to the committee. The other columns, you can read through them, but the actuals that we have represented in this table are the actuals that were presented to us by the finance department as of 12/31/24. So please keep that in mind as you look at this. There are, I am assuming that there are other figures that exist at this point, and they've just not been shared with us as of now. Next slide. So one of the core topics that we have discussed as a body over the past year is that we need financial updates and we want proposals that are transparent, efficient, peer reviewed, and we often ask, am I making an informed decision? And so that all goes back to having data. We're making analytical decisions off of data. So we were relying on staff to partner with us in this mission to make informed decisions. So the table to the right, projects with a 500K, that is so year to date or inception to date, we have received 35 funding requests that total $41 million. 9 of those requests were for $500,000. $4.5 million of requests that we don't have any data for. We just have a blanket $500,000 ask. Well, we want to know why. Why is $500,000 the magic number for projects that don't come paired with in-depth proposals? So we need staff to be transparent with us and say, this is this is just an amount that we're looking for. We're going to do more research, or this is the actual amount that we have budgeted based on our conversations with service providers. The warming center is one of those projects, $500,000 with no plan and no money spent. So we want more information, and we have spoken about that time and time again. These $500,000 projects, as of 12/31, had no expenditures at all. So again, we are reserving millions of dollars from the Measure P budget and we're not using it, we don't have a plan and we don't have any explanation as to why we don't have a plan and why we're choosing this amount to set aside. So financial updates is going to be key for this committee moving forward. And I hope that everybody can see the value in making decisions, financial decisions based on accurate data. Next slide. Based on the amount of conversation that we have had about work plan and needing financial information, the timing of it, and what is really expected of this body per the ordinance, I think it's important that we have a study session and council is included. We were lucky enough to have our council liaison, Councilmember Matias, and our mayor just joined us. So that's great. We are off to a great start, but we really need some feedback from council, and it goes to co-chair. Are you still the co-chair? No? No. Okay. Who are you? It goes to it goes to committee member Farrell's point earlier that we really want council's input on how much of Measure P's dollars do they plan on allocating to different emergencies or different needs across the city. How can we partner with staff? How can we partner with council and really make it efficient? We shouldn't have to go through 3 or 4 meetings just to send a recommendation out to council and get it back and deliberate again. So I think that it would be in our best interest to have a study session with council, with staff, with this committee to, one, consider using the framework of the participatory budgeting rule book. Anybody who's not familiar with it, I have a few examples in later slides, but participatory budgeting is broken up into cycles and they have the same different stages that repeat every single cycle, and they have rules and they have documented procedures for every stage in the cycle. The city already has invested in this rule book. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's be efficient. Let's take that rule book as our framework. Let's put Measure P spin on it. We can have a study session and hey, we saved a ton of time and money. So I think we should definitely consider using the participatory budgeting rule book. Another item is inviting other commissions to weigh in. We have a proposal for funding of block security cameras coming up in a couple of weeks, but when I was researching it, I realized that the SAB isn't going to give their recommendation and approval until June on these cameras. So is it appropriate for Measure P to make a recommendation on funding before the SAB actually approves or analyzes the use of these cameras? They're the experts, and I want to defer to the other commissions who are making informed decisions. And I would hope that they have the same respect for Measure P when they need to lean on us. So I really find the importance in all the other commissions and welcome any of the commissioners to come by, make comments, or, even invite us to their meetings if, hey, let's be friends. Subcommittee reports, another important topic that was actually brought up today. We should be committing and working on an audit subcommittee now, so that way next year we know who created the scope of work. We know what that engagement letter looks like. We understand what the procedures are and why they were created that way. We can have the opportunity to even say, make sure that the auditors interview somebody from the committee. So that way we don't miss anything and they have information. Committee member Farrell made sure to bring up the MRG report to LSL today. That's important. So if you were interviewed next year, you'd be able to make that type of contribution to the audit as well. An independent auditor, I just kind of was looking forward when I made this work plan, but I think you guys understood what I was getting at today. Having an independent auditor from the city's regular financials could be a huge benefit to us. We could have another auditor who has a relationship only with Measure P financials and is not producing reports that are layered on top of their work they're already doing for the city. So I think that will be important. And of course, this is probably my favorite, but public engagement. We're budgeted and allowed to have 2 public engagement sessions every year. Last year, we only used 1, and we didn't really have the momentum to have another one. But I think that that's something that we should have another subcommittee for, and we should work towards that public engagement, and even as a part of the study session. Next slide. So on this slide, I have the rules from participatory budgeting on how it works. And it's really cool because anybody can access this on the city's website and understand how PB works. And then you can make a decision, where do I fit into this process? And I think that's also would be something that's important for the community to understand, where do they fit into Measure P's process? Can I recommend spending? If I am a nonprofit partner, can I make a presentation to staff and to the committee? What is the proposal criteria? What are the do's and don'ts? How can we engage with the community? What are things that council is really interested in? So what's council's consideration? Giving updates, getting updates, timelines, deliverables. So I think that we need to make a map of the process so that way everybody at any time can reference it and know exactly where they fit in. Next slide. That leads me to roles and responsibilities. PB has it already mapped out who does what, and they have lots of volunteers. So when I was on PB, we had youth delegates, budget delegates, and then we had budget delegates who were adults. Some of them were actually nonprofits in Vallejo who volunteered to help create these different budgets for these different projects. So everybody should understand exactly what their role is, what their responsibility is, where they fit in, but also where can they go from here? If you're a volunteer today, could you become a commissioner tomorrow? Yes. And that's exactly what I did with participatory budgeting many, many years ago. I volunteered for a few years. I really liked it. And then I became a commissioner. And so that really is, I think, an important way to keep community engagement going and have a cycle of perpetuating engagement, right? We want our volunteers to continue to do things, continue to participate. So this also, I think, is important for us to understand how to partner with staff. It has city managers' responsibilities, the city attorney's responsibilities. So we all understand what our purview is and how we should interact with each other. So again, throwing in subcommittees, we should definitely define what subcommittees we want for this committee, and we should make that a part of the roles and responsibilities. As it was explained to us in a previous meeting, subcommittees are not long-standing. So if you volunteer to be on a subcommittee today, you're not going to be on that subcommittee forever. After that work is done, and there's a new subcommittee, or the cycle continues, we will pick another person to be on that subcommittee. Next slide. Proposal criteria. This is just a simple matrix of what are the different projects and what is the criteria for a proposal. I think something like that would be very helpful, not necessarily in the same format, but to really include what this committee is looking for in terms of information and data when staff is presenting to us. We've sat here for over 4 hours at a time asking questions on top of questions repeatedly. And there's a more efficient way for us to receive proposals and make decisions. So if staff can work on a template and the committee can also review and add to that template, then we will be able to efficiently get through these proposals and ask even more meaningful questions and get deeper into these projects. Next slide. Timeline and deliverables. Again, there's another reference from the participatory budgeting rulebook. The cycle is broken up into months, and it's followed very, very closely every year. That is something that is very similar to Measure P because we're following the budget, we're following the audit timelines. There are specific deliverable dates that staff needs to adhere to make it onto the appropriate agenda for council. So I think staff can help us out with really coming up with the timelines for each of these different stages in our annual cycles. And we can insert what deliverables that as a committee that we need to provide. So our next deliverable is going to be the audit report. So we need to figure out where that goes in this timeline, and then we need to stick to it, and we need to hold ourselves accountable and not take too long to produce reports that staff is waiting for us to produce. Next. And just for so this isn't on the presentation. The committee has a copy of 2 variance reports that I created. So the first variance report is a summary, and it has all of the dates rolled up into a couple of different columns: funding requests inception to date, budgeted amounts inception to date, actual expenditures inception to date, encumbrances inception to date, the totals, and then the variance amounts. And so we should be paying close attention to the variance amounts to understand what is not being spent on these projects. The secondary report is actually an expanded report, and that's where you get the date of the request. So if we see that a request was given to the Measure P committee on January 25th of 2024, and we're in April of 2025, and there is a variance of the entire amount budgeted, we need to start asking questions. Why isn't the money being spent? What are we going to do? Do we expect to have that amount reallocated to Measure P so we can reassign to another project? So these are different financial reports that I would like for finance to consider carrying forward, so I don't have to keep making them. I can send the Excel template. That would be great if I could get some assistance with that. And that's pretty much it. I definitely would love for everybody to chime in and ask questions, make recommendations. It's really important that we keep this conversation going and open it up to staff as well to give us some feedback.
What did you need help on Excel? What did you need help on in Excel?
Just carrying this, rolling this forward with like updated financial information.
Thank you, Chair. I wish you would come and work for us. So as far as the report is concerned, I can comment on that. We are happy to follow the layout that you've given, and maybe instead of just a suggestion, instead of waiting till the next meeting, we could just send it as a memo every quarter or something like that, because we can generate it from the system. The only thing is, I remember last time you had mentioned if it has a reasoning on the side, if there are variances, that might take us a little time to get in touch with every department and find out where they are with the project. Finance just collects all the numbers. But if it's just getting a report out every quarter, we could, just a suggestion, we could just send it as an email out to everyone. That's.
Yeah, I think for me, what's most important is having the updated actuals, because the request amount and the approved amounts aren't going to change after they're approved, but just being able to understand where these projects are at. And I know that you don't create these proposals, but one really important metric for me is to understand project start and end dates from whatever department is proposing, so that way we can understand if this is a multi-year project and it's supposed to end at the end of this year, then we know, okay, we have a mechanism in place to follow up on projects that are ending, and then start to ask if those funds are going to be reallocated to the Measure P's available balance, or if there's going to be an amendment to the project that extends the timeline for that project.
So I guess that's something in the staff report we put in along with fiscal impact duration.
Right. I think we can find, you know, as we talk to more people in different departments, we can find a good way for them to share that information with us. And maybe it's a part of their proposal criteria that they submit that to us at the beginning. But that's why I think the study session would be really helpful so that we can understand from staff, you know, when is it best for them to share this information and what works, you know, what works best for them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like creating a template that would include that, but that's going forward. So going back, we would, you know, especially since there are a lot of funds out there that are unspent, it would be a great understanding to, you know, what the project is supposed to start and end.
Okay. She just gave an idea. She said on the budget book, we have a page for Measure P, and maybe we could put one more column for dates of project or something like that in the budget book, if that helps.
There's also something on we have the CIP, the 5-year capital improvement program. So on that book, we have like a page for each of the project. So on that page, it will show what is the description, what is the timeline, what is the status, where is the location. So maybe we can share that though, like, and then we can come up with like a format, the CIP book. We have the capital improvement budget book that has like the budget book page for each of the project.
But that's only for capital improvement projects. That wouldn't include every project that.
We can use that format because like the Measure P is really like most of those are multi-year projects.
Right. And I think that's helpful for us to have at nearly every meeting that we have, because if I'm looking at the summary sheet, this one right here, I can look and say, okay, inception to date, we've had $41 million in requests, but we also have $33 million that's unspent as of 12/31, right? So having information really concise and consolidated in that format helps me ask questions. At the bottom of this summary, I have the values by priority. So if police were coming to make a proposal, I could just look at the priority and say, okay, public safety, you know, or crime prevention, they've asked for 4 million and we're budgeted 3 million and they haven't spent 1.3 million, right? And so that helps me understand, do you have time to take on more proposals, or is this just a long-term project? I can come up with better questions immediately without flipping through a book.
Yeah, the proposal, like just like what you're saying, maybe there is like a format for each of the proposal that will kind of cover like whatever are the data that you need, like project duration, right? Because there are some that are short term and there are some times that, you know, like it takes like a contract, RFP. So maybe like we can request, like when you do the proposal, there would be like a timeline so that you can kind of understand when would it be spent. Like the RCIP book even has it year by year, kind of projecting what would be the expenditure year by year. So we can take a look at it and then maybe come up with a format that will cover all the information you need, because we understand that you would like also to see the actual spending.
That's all very constructive. Thank you. There's a finance part of this. Of course, there's a heavy engagement part that is not your responsibility, but it's prioritized in the PB work plan. And so I don't think we can complete a review and approval of this tonight. I don't think that was the intent. Because of the heavy workload for staff, I wonder about the formation of an ad hoc committee of the MPOC that would continue to refine this, working through you and the other departments, because I think this should be a joint effort. And the PB expertise, for example, that Chair Salmarone has, their city staff that's worked extensively with that, and we should learn from their experience. I'm also going to call out the mayor and council member Matias. It's apparent that Measure P revenue is essential to the well-being of the city of Vallejo, and that's why it was passed, to meet unfunded needs that had been ignored for, in some cases, nearly decades. But like with ARPA funds, we need to have some strategic planning with some fundamental goal setting, and it's so hard to do with the volume of issues coming to you that you must react to on every agenda. And I don't have a solution to how we do both at the same time, but I'd like to hear comments, because it's so easy to feel the intense pressure to respond to a specific need and then discover, oh my goodness, we weren't anticipating that we also are facing, we all know we need streets and public safety, but there are other priorities, and we should have economic development added to the statutory priorities, in my opinion, because without strong economic growth, we can't pay for all the things we need. But how do we not continue to make major decisions with no plan? And I would like the council each year to be giving some general guidance about priorities for Measure P without specific funding requests, but to do that in advance to help influence which recommendations do come to Measure P, instead of staff being solely burdened with that, and they have lots to contribute to the discussion, but it's a policy issue more, not just a specific project issue, and I would like council to be guiding the policy. Please.
Be brief on this one, and the mayor can chime in. We were actually talking about this during the Causeway Bridge approval request that came in. And one of the things I noted specifically was that Councilmember Palmares, for the better part of 2 years, has been requesting from the city manager's office that there be some very, intentional forward planning around specifically the types of things that you've alluded to during this meeting. Now, what I suggested was that take place during goal setting, right? If we're aligning around a set of priorities in that meeting, then that should normally flow to a lot of the projects and the funding that's coming into the city. We haven't had that yet, but we will in the next couple of months. And so I'm hoping that also helps inform the sorts of requests that this body is getting, number one. And then number two, I was just chatting with the mayor about the fact that I think the timeline piece that the chairman alluded to is critically important, not just for this body, but for council, and for also for the purposes of holding ourselves accountable to follow through on a project by a given timeline. And so one of the things I would ask you guys to consider is, in that end of year report, maybe highlighting some recommendations. I thought of maybe changing the staff report template to include a title on there that says, project timeline. And then that also flows into, the templates that you guys are developing at the commission level. So those are the sorts of things that would be helpful to have in a report that we can then give to the city manager's office and hold his team accountable to follow through and implement.
Microphone.
Sorry.
Real quick, I don't have a ton to add, but I wanted to make one more note that at the budget meeting that we just had this past Saturday, I made the request that I think P should be budgeted as much as possible with the rest of the budget in advance, because otherwise the risk that we run is that we do council does the budget, and then P just becomes the fund for all the stuff that we couldn't fit into the budget. And so I think you got to do it all together, and I think you got to include some goals and some vision. And I like the idea of making something analogous to PB, not identical necessarily, but I really appreciated that because I think that kind of hits at some of the let's have some foresight of how all these pieces fit together. And, you know, Councilmember Matias has been thinking about this and advocating about this for, you know, the whole time we've been on there, and I know we'll continue to do so. So as you get ideas, this is all a new process. I was chair of a brand new commission, so I know it's hard to start a commission. It's a blank slate, but it gives you opportunities to think outside the box. So I appreciate that you all are doing that. I just want to thank you for what you're doing.
If I could follow up with a quick question. So it's apparent from the discussion regarding the causeway that there's a sharp conflict in the community, and that extends to some MPOC members who participated in the campaign, signed ballot arguments about whether the Measure P funding is to fund staff positions in perpetuity and some other purposes that were rejected as legitimate uses during the campaign, and some of that was shared with the community. And we lost the sales tax measure in 2020 because Measure B had not been implemented in accordance with the campaign. This is subject to debate, you know, but Councilmember Matias, former Vice Mayor Loera Diaz know as much or more than anyone else about the history, which the council could choose to ignore. It is a general tax. However, the ballot arguments matter, the campaigns matter, and the ordinance matters, but there's ambiguity. I'm bringing this up because what I heard during the meeting wasn't it wasn't subject to any caveat. Of course, some of our MPOC members and other people instrumental in the campaign have a very different view. That wasn't told to the council or the community during the meeting. But we've all discovered here we have different perceptions and there are ambiguities. But when we don't have guidance from the council, and for example, if staff is told unconditionally the money cannot or can be used for salaries, okay, I think it can be used for the specific purpose of the sheriff's deputy's contract, but positions in perpetuity are different, and I don't know how the council may vote on all of those issues, but when it's reported to the council unconditionally, it can be, that then is etched into everyone's mind, and I don't know how to avoid this altogether because we're going to have disagreements, but I just want to highlight it that there are disagreements about that.
Appreciate that. I can only give my opinion on that. I think that's something that we really want to see the commission work through, because the charge of this commission is, it's pretty open-ended, and it's a tough one. And in as much as we can be supportive in creating the conditions for you to be able to do the work, like budgeting ahead of time, having some clear goals, trying to set some clear parameters and processes, that we're very committed to doing. Yeah.
And one comment, Mayor, before you go, and committee, you know, I would just like everybody to think about having Measure P present when our items are presented to council to answer any questions or to even present their position. And it could be a different person every time. It doesn't have to just like be me. It could be anybody who's like, hey, I want to go to council and I want to speak about this item and represent it. But I think that there's a huge opportunity for us as a committee to represent our recommendations in a thoughtful and thorough manner to council before they make decisions.
And I ran into that on the SAB, and I'm fully supportive of having commissioners come either officially or unofficially. We dealt with it with a planning commission item, or no, an architectural heritage commission item as well, where we felt we would have liked to have the architectural heritage commissioners there. So yeah, I 100% agree with you.
Briefly, I think that as much as this is a complex matter when it comes to the Measure P tax, for some reason with me, the priorities, 1 through 9 priorities, have never been complex. And they've been pretty much the standard in which this Measure P tax was voted for. Much of the feedback that I've received from the community is that we are veering away from the 9 priorities. And I know that that can easily happen when you started making broad the definitions and the things that could come, with all of them, we can come up with 50 million things that can come under each priority. But if we stick with the basis of which, when I first got on this committee and was reading about this committee, the 9 priorities and the definition of those 9 priorities, they were pretty cut and dry for me. And I think that if we kind of stay close to that definition and the things that the taxpayers that we voted for and as commissioners that we came on this aboard this commission, we can avoid a lot of this conversation. I am in no way compelled to support any salary in any way, any form. Again, the city staff can present it, the council can come up, but I think that that was never part of the Measure P. And once we start opening that door for those type things, it only makes us keep opening the door. So how do we just make this decision in this instance, and then you deny it in the next instance? And it just becomes, in my opinion, open up a whole can of worms that you just can't catch all the worms. So I think that if we stay within the 9 priorities, in that definition in which they were given and the taxpayers voted for, we'll find ourselves in a better place. The second part that I found along this process was, like, for example, with the warming centers, we did blindly give the $500,000, I'll say. We were a new commission, but we wanted it, right? We wanted to work. Yes, that's what you asked for, that's what you need, and of course we support it. And then, I mean, the money wasn't used as of yet. I am hopeful that it will be used for those purposes that it was intended for. But what I realized was that participatory budget also gave $75,000. And so that was just with that. So also for us, with the youth, which was priority number 9, we did give monies. And one of the areas in that was for, this is the Maccabee Fire Academy, and participatory budget also gave to that. So there's this kind of double dipping that I don't know how we encase those things to catch it before the money's is overspent like that. But I just happened to be looking at something, reading something, and started paying more attention to finances of the city, right? And I saw that. So I don't know how we would catch that, but that was one of the things that I saw that was happening. So in my opinion, I was thinking, oh, that's $75,000 of Measure P money that can come back because they got the participatory budget money, right? It may not be that simple, but again, that was some of the things that I learned over the last few months. So again, I'm excited about our chair and our new vice chair leading this commission, and grateful for our former vice chair and all the work that he has done with this commission with our chair. And I'm excited about this new year, and because I have learned just a little bit more about the commission, about how the city operates, then I think that we are on a good start to a more successful commission this year as well. Thank you.
I think that's a great suggestion to integrate the outcome of PB. As we know, PB gets their, they understand exactly where their funds are going to be allocated to at a certain point in time. So we should integrate that as an update from that commission into our timeline. When do we receive an update as to what their funding cycle? I think recently they moved to a 2-year cycle instead of a 1-year cycle. So it might take us longer to get those updates, but at least when there are updates, we can try to get them and get a presentation from their committee. I think that would be really nice.
And for the staff, I'm going to repeat myself probably for the fourth time. Please give us the presentations and data that we need to be aware of at least 48 hours prior to our meetings. Not the same day, not a couple of hours before the meeting.
Oh, I do have one more thing. How do we get a set date to meet? Whether it's the first Monday, the first Thursday of the month, I mean, just a regular scheduled meeting so that we're not guessing when we're meeting and we're not having a whole lot of votes throughout the month on when to meet via email. Randy?
That's something that the commission can decide. There are, if I recall correctly, 3 absolute meeting dates that are within the ordinance, that we could come up with a plan for setting meetings for those, I believe, because they're date dependent anyway, right? They're dependent upon the budget cycle of the city. So I think that we could certainly come up with dates for those. Additional meetings that you want, that's up to you. We'd have to decide what those would be.
I'd like to implement the mayor's recommendation that we tie our cycle to the budget process. We won't have as many Saturday town halls, but I can't do that tonight. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I don't want to. So, and this report tonight was timely and necessary, but if we are going to receive the staff recommendations for specific budget, for specific projects, I think in advance of that, there has to be some general involvement of the council and community before staff does all that work of preparing specific budget requests. So I don't know when those should happen. So I would look for guidance from staff or council members regarding the budget cycle.
Chair, can I just ask a clarifying question? So to the city attorney, are we not allowed to make changes to the ordinance as it relates to meeting frequency? The council?
No, you can have as many meetings as you want. There are 3 that you have to have.
No, I get that,
Right.
but I think part of the issue that we're running into is, those 3 may happen on a Monday, a Thursday,
Right.
or Friday, right? And so what I'm hearing from this group is they want some certainty, right? Like,
Sure.
it's happening on this day, on this month. And
Right.
so can we, the council, make an update to the ordinance that would provide that clarity to the
So-
body based on the recommendation?
So those meetings aren't set in the ordinance right now. There's nothing that says that they have to occur on a date certain, right? So what we've talked about a little bit in the past is coming up with a process where we set the dates far enough ahead of when the recommendations need to go to council. That just is going to require some thought on the part of staff and I think on the committee to come up with a proposal that works. How much time do we need from the point of getting the idea to the point of getting it to the commission and then getting it to the council? And I don't know what that number is at this
So
point.
let me just play out one scenario. Measure P Oversight recommends to council that they want to meet 10 times a year
Sure.
on every 3rd Wednesday of every month. Can the city council make an update to the ordinance to say this is the new meeting frequency for this body based on this body's recommendation? Can we do that?
You can do that with a resolution, yes.
Okay. Just putting it out there.
One thing that I've heard from our committee, but I've also received feedback from staff directly, is the length of these meetings. I hear a lot of deep breathing over here right now. And it's important to me to be able to have these agenda setting meetings that I push really hard for, because it gives me an opportunity to have a one-on-one with staff and understand if there are important and critical projects that need to come before Measure P, or if this is a project that a department would just like to pitch and, you know, they would appreciate funding, but if not, they'll go look somewhere else for it. An example was we had a meeting with a bunch of proposals on it, and they were just regular proposals. But then at the last minute, we had to add the Broadway project. I had the option of adding it to the agenda at the last minute or putting it on a separate meeting. But the co-chair, and I had the opportunity to sit down with Gillian and understand that there were time constraints and there were a lot of moving parts with this request. And so we decided to add that project proposal onto the upcoming agenda. Those agenda setting meetings are really helpful because then we get an idea of how long we're going to be here. And, you know, people have said, I can't make good decisions this late at night. We're getting close to midnight. Like, I can't make good decisions. And I know, council, I'm preaching to the choir, right? But it's important to recognize that staff's been working all day long. And when we say, hey, we want to continue this, they're upset because they've waited probably 3 hours to even present their project or their proposal. So, you know, I think it's really important that we open up the communication and we really understand the time commitments that we're asking of each other when we are creating these agendas. Tonight's meeting, I mean, we're on great time right now, right? We won't be here till 9 o'clock, but that's great. We should be able to have more of these meetings that are more efficient and we're more conscious of each other's time and, you know, give each other that respect. So I think that it's the timing, the length of the meetings, but also having the ability to have those agenda setting calls so that way we can understand what everybody's priorities are and who's impacted the most by these decisions. So that's pretty much all I have to add.
I would recommend that the work plan include ultimate council approval of agenda review meetings before every MPOC meeting because of the values that you just outlined. And even though I'm sure it's frustrating if a chair, vice chair is as argumentative as I can be at times, it's still very beneficial for me to learn and to know how the issues are framed, because again, I've discovered so many times there's ambiguity I didn't realize working on the campaign and, you know, and for other reasons. And so, but all of the specific things related to each item keep me more focused. And, you know, I wish everybody could go to the agenda planning meetings, but they can't, or then it would be a notice meeting. But I find them invaluable, and your time is precious too. So you know, we want to be respectful of that, and I want to underscore that when I ask for records or information, I am not offended at all if somebody says, if I have to get all of those things, and you alluded to that earlier in this meeting, that's going to be a project that takes, you know, 50 hours, 20 hours, and that I had no knowledge that might, I want to hear how we can do things efficiently. And I don't always know, I often don't, but so I find the meetings invaluable, and I'm sure that Vice Chair, you will also.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
To the city attorney, in summary, then, do we have to make a motion to have periodic meetings, let's say once a month, let's say second Monday of every month, commission meeting, and based on circumstances, they may be canceled, but we will have them calendared, and also we can use them as per Brown Act, we cannot talk to one another. And we become aware of a lot of critical things that we need to make decisions and recommendations on the spot 2 hours before the meeting. So can we do study sessions with public?
Yes, you
Okay.
can do that. As far as making a motion to set the meetings, I would suggest that you not do that at this point, just because we don't know when we have time and space, because we have 19 or 20 other commissions that are all demanding of space and time. So we'd have to go and find a spot where we would do that. But you could certainly, a way to do that would be to make a recommendation to council to set a meeting for you, and then that can go through that process of finding a spot where we can get you in.
Can we make a request of staff to get us some idea of what the availability is for this commission to have regular monthly meetings? So you just said that there's all these other commissions.
Yeah, that would require someone besides me.
Yeah.
More the space that this room, we are usually lucky when we get this room, but I think, Monica, we can find out the days this room is available. And once it's set, and 6 months from now, it's easy. It's like, oh, next Monday I need it, then there's probably somebody who has already calendared it.
And these would be in addition to the ordinance required for meetings, the audits, the reporting, and
Sure.
budget.
I do think it's important to come up with a timeline for those meetings, since they are so date dependent on the budget, right? You guys need to have your work done by a certain time so that it can get to council, so that they have time to consider whatever your recommendations are, rather than, I know sometimes, a few times during the last year, we've like done it the day before the council meeting. So nobody has time to really get things moved over to them. So I'm suggesting that you would do both if you want to make a recommendation for those regular monthly meetings, but also you need to figure out how much time it is do you need before council's going to have their budget vote to consider a project. And then staff can plan around that accordingly too. That's helpful to us as well.
We have the participatory budgeting blueprint guidelines that we can easily use. Thank you, Chair.
So at this time, can I create a subcommittee for Measure P rulebook?
You can't, but the committee can.
Okay, so, and what's the process? Do I just make a motion?
Someone could take a motion to create, you could make a motion to create a subcommittee to work on the work plan, yeah.
Okay, and then my idea is that we create a subcommittee to work on the work plan, start kind of adopting and taking out what we don't want from from PB, and then setting a date with council and staff and everybody else to propose that and get some feedback, so that way we can try, and we will also be accountable to you all and send it to you in advance, so that way you have time to think about it. And so I think that would be probably our next step. So I like to make a motion to create a work plan subcommittee.
I second that.
Jones,
Yes.
Tibet, Chair,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Briseño.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, Chair, you would need to decide who's going to be on that subcommittee. It can have up to 3 members, as long as it's below a quorum, yeah.
Okay, so are there any volunteers for?
I'll do it.
Oh, okay. So Briseño, Tibet, and Salmeron as the subcommittee on the work plan. Thank you.
And this is what we refer to typically as an ad hoc committee. It's a limited term, just until you finish the work plan. Okay. That way you don't have to have notice meetings and do all that.
Perfect. Does
We don't
anybody
have to have notice of the meetings?
Oh, good. Does anybody have anything to add to this agenda item? Committee work plan timelines and deliverables.
would recommend that the work plan include the schedule for the year, draft schedule, and also agenda review meetings in advance of each meeting, as long as everyone is available to do that, but it should be the practice. Those are two suggestions.
Thank you for that, and I believe Co-Chair Tibet would like to make a separate motion.
I'd like to make a motion to create a reporting subcommittee for the audit report, yeah.
Okay, so are we done then with the work plan item? Because then you would have to reopen actually, we were going to do, I'm sorry, that was on the information calendar. We were going to bring that back to you at your next meeting so you could do that, because you can't take action on it because it's on information this evening. On the report. That's on the audit report. Let's bring it back separately. So just, yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Please.
Great. Okay, so now we will move on to 11, information calendar.
Actually, I've already done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Future agenda items. Okay. Do we have any future agenda items that anybody on the committee would like to add?
Well, you can put on the proposal for a subcommittee for reporting.
Yes.
Yeah,
For the audit.
I already have that one.
At sometime within the last couple of months, that's a very rough estimate, I understood through the city manager's office that the MRG audit report would be on an MPOC agenda, and I would like to request that it be on a future agenda for takeaways and recommendations going forward.
I'd like to invite iHeart and VPD to make a presentation about their year in review, and the services that they provided, and be able to share that with the community.
So what will happen to those items we just identified, the iHeart report or the MRG report?
Sure.
Thank you.
So what we'll do is put those on a future agenda for the committee to deliberate whether or not to agendize them for action. So that's the city's two-step process.
Unless staff believes they're so important that independently puts them on our agenda, which the city manager told us he would do a few months ago, and then it didn't happen.
That's up to him.
Okay, but I would like those who are the ultimate authority on the governing body of the city to indicate, not by coming up to the microphone, but whether they think it would be practical for us to take up those two items at a future agenda. Thumbs up. So I'd like that reported to the city manager. Thank you very much.
I will do that.
I'd also like to invite Vallejo together to make a presentation to us as well, just to information, and this is aligned with the homelessness priority, and could potentially help us make some decisions down the line if council decides to use Vallejo together in any of the solutions that they are considering. Do we have any other future agenda items? All right, well, if that's it, then we can adjourn at 8:08 p.m. Thank you, everyone.